What should you do if your 2021 cruise gets cancelled from here onwards? I think you should be rethinking what you were planning to do. I'm going to share with you 4 really important tips and things that I think you should be looking at if your cruise this year gets cancelled. Whether it's your first cruise or you've had multiple cruises cancelled, these are the things I really think you should consider doing. First of all, stop for a while. Think and reflect on when and what cruising this year is going to be looking like before you do anything. No one knows when cruising will return, not even the cruise lines. It's out of their hands. It's very much up to government agencies and the way things play out. So nobody knows when it returns. Q4 is when the cruise lines do believe that things might be back much more to normal. The second thing to think about is when cruises resume, I strongly believe they will almost certainly be brand new cruises. They're going to be shorter, they're going to be more local. The advertised cruises will be scrapped, and we've seen that happen in Germany, in Italy, in Norway, in Singapore, in Japan and Taiwan. This is the way that cruises will open. They will be different cruises. The next thing to think about is bear in mind the protocols, despite the vaccines, will be in place. So you're going to have things like reduced capacity, multiple testing probably before you get on the cruise, before you get off the cruise. You're going to have to wear things like masks. You're going to have multiple temperature controls and checks. You're going to have changes in dining with only people in your party. So lots of different protocols which will be in place during 2021. That's something to think about. The other thing to think about is, as you think about your cruise, getting to and from cruises could be increasingly complicated, particularly if you're looking at air travel. We're seeing lots of borders closed. We're seeing lots of restrictions with coming in and out of country. So even calling on ports of call, there may be a whole myriad of new things to navigate. The other key thing to bear in mind is when countries will be opening. So Canada, for example, has to open before Alaska can run. You have Australia, which has a ban on cruise ships. You have the Caribbean islands talking about reservations about bringing cruise lines back. So you need to think about when countries are going to be open to take cruises. Bear in mind, cruises longer than 7 nights are also banned in the United States right through until November. So it's really important to understand that no one really knows at this point of time how the year will play out. So bear that in mind and all these issues as you look at what I think you should be doing. So now let's get into some very specific things. Your cruise is cancelled. What should you do? First of all, if you've paid your entire fare, I recommend strongly that you take a cash refund. Don't take future cruise credit. And the reason for this is I think it's really important to stay flexible. It's important to remember that future cruise credit, once you take them, cannot be turned into cash at a later point, even if you don't use all of it. Future cruise credits have an expiry date. If you haven't used it, it will expire. You will lose that money. If you already have multiple future cruise credits from different cruises with one line, you might find that you can only use one future cruise credit against one cruise. Now that is evolving a bit. Royal Caribbean, for example, now lets you bunch together future cruise credits. So check really carefully before you take future cruise credit if you have more than one, because you might find you can only use one future cruise credit on one new booking, so you'd have to book multiple bookings. As I said, if you have any left over, you will lose it if you don't use it. So for example, I took some future cruise credit early on. It was a 200% bonus. I booked a new cruise and I still have some left over. It does mean that I will lose that money unless I book another cruise with that cruise line and spend even more money. So really, really important to understand. Now, the reasons that I say you should take the dollars if you have booked a cruise and paid in full, and why I think it's really important that you stay as flexible as possible. So if you've handed over loads of money, get it back and be flexible. First of all, the lines themselves and the Cruise Line Association and even governments are pushing very, very hard for cruising to resume, of course, but cruising to resume with local cruises. So you want to be able to be flexible, have the money to jump on those cruises when they come up. So that's what happened with people in Singapore, in Taiwan, in Japan, in Germany, in Italy, and so on. They are brand new cruises and brand new fares, brand new deals, and you want to be able to jump on those. And then your line may not be offering those. Secondly, governments are advising really strongly to avoid any form of international travel outside your country. You have the US State Department saying so. You have Justin Trudeau in Canada saying so. You have UK ministers saying so. You have the Australian ministers saying so. There is not going to be a lot of incentives, and moving outside your country is going to be difficult as it is, and we don't know how that's going to play out. So having the flexibility to spend on cruises sailing from your home ports and close to you and local is something worth having. You don't want your money tied up in cruises you can't do. So it's really important to book a cruise and have the flexibility to book at a port that is right next to you. So if you're in the UK, that's Southampton or Dover or Newcastle or Liverpool. If you're in the US, look at Carnival and Royal Caribbean, who depart from loads of different ports around the country. If you're in Europe, MSC, they let you embark at all the ports they call on, and so on. So you really want to focus and be able to have the money to jump on those local cruises, the no-fly cruises. Prices also are all over the place at the moment. And until the cruise lines know exactly what they're selling and what they're actually going to be able to sail, prices won't really settle down. And what we did find, in fact, that those new cruises that came up in Singapore, in Italy, they did not sail even at the reduced capacity full. And there are lots of great deals. So you want to have cash to be flexible. So if you've paid the full amount, I recommend you get the money back and build in flexibility. If you've only paid the deposit, however, I would recommend something different. I would actually take the extra bonus and book the same cruise or as close to similar cruise in 2022, especially if your deposit's not that much money, so it's not going to be tying up a lot of money. And it's a bucket list cruise that you really, really want to do. So actually lift and shift it, as it were, if you can. So I've done that so far with an Alaska trip. I've moved it to next year. I've done that with an African river cruise. I've done that with the Virgin new ships. So as they've got cancelled, I've moved and booked similar cruises right into next year because the money I had tied up is not that great. The second reason that I say move it into next year is, especially if it's a bucket list cruise, there's a much greater chance of the full advertised trip happening. There will be some easing of protocols, we're sure. There will be, if not, there'll be clear rules around the role of vaccinations, testing, quarantining, whatever it is. Countries are more likely to have opened, excursions are more likely to be freer because people have worked out how to manage around this whole situation by then. The third thing I would do, though, is if you do want to rebook, 3 absolute rules to follow. And I'm repeating a little bit of what I might have said, but again, if you are going to book when your cruise gets cancelled something else, 3 rules to follow. First of all, focus on a port local to you, where you ideally don't even have to fly to it, so that you can actually just drive to it, so you don't have to worry about all of the hassles of airlines and so on, just the complications of flying. Secondly, book a cruise this year that calls to as few countries as you possibly can to avoid any possible challenges. So that's, for example, in the UK, maybe around the UK trip. If you're in Europe, one of those cruises that just goes around Italy or calls on very few countries, maybe 2 countries. Or if you, of course, in Singapore, you've got things like the no-fly cruises. In the US, look at cruises when they eventually come up that perhaps call on one port in the US and then call it private islands, or call it perhaps private islands and the Bahamas, something like that. And then the third key thing is book as late in the year as possible. So ideally, book in Q4, so October, November, December, or July, August kind of time, June, July, August, but as late as possible because you have the greatest chance of things being a little bit calmer. So those 3 really important rules if you are rebooking existing cruises that are being advertised. I still recommend, though, wait for those new cruises to come on board. The next point I have is travel insurance. When you book or look to rebook a cruise, make sure you have travel insurance. You take out travel insurance that includes cancellation, and cancellation for any reason. Flexibility is the name of the game, of course, but you want to make sure that you can cancel. It's really important you buy insurance so it's in place if you need to cancel, and look at cancellation for any reason. Now, of course, the cruise lines do have much more flexibility, so do look at what those policies are. There are policies, for example, which guarantee that you can cancel a cruise up to 48 hours before you sail right through into next year and get a future cruise credit back. So there's lots of flexibility around. So look, if you are going to rebook, at having insurance or making sure that you're booking with one of those policies that allow a lot of flexibility. Again, it could tie you, though, into future cruise credit. But let's really face it, we do not know how things are going to play out. So it's really important, I think, if your cruise gets cancelled, to follow these approaches, whether you've paid the full amount. I think there's one route you should go. If you've paid the deposit only, there's another route you go, and a key set of principles if you are going to rebook. We just don't know how things are going to settle down, and that's what I recommend for this year anyway. You look at doing if your cruise gets cancelled. If you found this interesting and helpful, remember I have loads more Tips for Travellers episodes packed full of cruising tips and advice. So why not go and enjoy one right now?